Greetings, humans of the internet. Welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. I, of course, am your excellent host, Luke, Flo's location in Midwest USA, with some more historical insights. It's been said there's a sucker born every minute, and you'd be surprised by what people will believe. American culture has often been influenced by hoaxes. If it's giant petrified men, UFOs, and other oddities, odds are people will believe it. And that is this week's topic, Great American Hoaxes. I thought the best place to begin would be one of the most famous American hoaxes in history, and that, of course, is the Cardiff Giant. Allow me to set the scene. The year is 1869. The place is the town of Cardiff, New York. Local tobacconist George Hull has hired some men to dig a well on his property. The men at the time thought this was strange, as there was a stream just a few feet away. And on October 16th of that year, a local tobacconist named George Hull hired some laborers to dig a well in a particular spot on his property. However, the laborers at the time thought this somewhat strange, as there was a stream just a few feet away. And when the men began digging, they noticed what looked to be a giant stone foot. And of course, the stone foot was connected to a stone giant. Newell erected a tent and started charging visitors 50 cents to enter to see what was called the Cardiff Giant. And soon, a large group of entrepreneurs purchased shares in the Giant and transported it to Syracuse, New York, Albany, New York, and New York City in search of bigger audiences. And as the Cardiff Giant rose in popularity, it attracted the attention of famous showman P.T. Barnum, who offered the staggering sum of $50,000, roughly $1 million, adjusted for inflation in today's money, for a quarter stake, but was turned down. Never one to take no for an answer, Barnum purchased a replica of the Giant from sculptor Carl Franz Otto and paraded it down Broadway in Manhattan with 12 horses pulling and 100 men marching alongside. And thanks to Barnum's flair, the imposter brought in thousands of paying visitors, while the quote-unquote authentic Cardiff Giant, exhibited a mere 2 blocks away, attracted only a trickle of guests. Although I should make a correction, the Giant was not actually found on Hull's property. It was found on the property of his friend and cousin, Stub Newell. And naturally, the finding attracted scientists. Some scientists speculated that the find was a petrified man, while others theorized it was a centuries-old statue made by Jesuit priests. Before long, however, esteemed paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh declared the Giant of very recent origin and a most decided humbug. And in 1870, the hoax was exposed when the sculptors came clean. It should come as no surprise that George Hull was not exactly an honest man. He had a resume that would be the envy of any con man. He had dabbled in horse trading, cheating at cards, and of course tobacco sales. Now, while being a tobacconist may seem honest enough, Hull occasionally burned down his own tobacco barns and cigar shops for insurance money. And while traveling through Iowa, Hull became embroiled in a debate with a minister about a passage from the book of Genesis. There were giants in the earth in those days, Genesis 6:4 says, and Hull was a devoured atheist, and this conversation inspired him to pull a prank. He decided to devise the Giant as a way to poke fun at people like the minister who interpreted the Bible literally. He also figured he could make some money in the process. And so he purchased a giant slab of gypsum in Iowa, which he then had carved in Chicago and then had shipped to Cardiff, New York, where it was buried. And when it was proven a hoax, it gathered a small following. The fake colossus resurfaced occasionally at state fairs and was bought and sold several times. And at some point along the way, the Giant broke in two at the knees. And in 1947, the Cardiff Giant found a permanent home close to the site of its original exhumation at the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York, where it has remained ever since. However, the Cardiff Giant wasn't the only fake giant among gullible men and women. The Cardiff hoax inspired at least a dozen different giant hoaxes, including the solid Muldoon, which was found in Beulah, Colorado in 1876 with a tail, a hoax slightly perpetrated by George Hull of Cardiff Giant fame, along with a former Barnum employee named William Connett. Also in Colorado, conman Jefferson Randolph Soapy Smith buried and found McGinty in Willow Creek, Colorado, and had charged $1 to look at him on display at his saloon, the Orleans Club in Creede, Colorado. And interestingly, when a scientist came to authenticate the Giant, it had conveniently disappeared. Soapy soon followed after. Boost profits for his hotel, the Tanacook House in Lake Cayuga, New York, a man named Cataract House, and yes, that was really his name, hired a foundry worker in 1877 to blend together a petrified man and then plant it to be found by workers by widening the hotel's road. His prank proved to be a wonderful promotion, drawing huge crowds until someone who had helped bury the fake, in a drunken stupor, let the truth slide out. On the subject of fake fossils, let me take you back to 1866 in Calaveras County, California. It was there that miners unearthed a human skull buried more than 100 feet deep in a mine under volcanic deposits. The skull wound up with Harvard University professor and California state geologist Josiah Whitney, who announced it was the evidence of the presence of humans in North America during the Pliocene era, some 5 to 2 million years ago. However, rumors soon began circulating around Calaveras County that local men had planted the skull as a practical joke. By some accounts, Whitney, who is now the namesake for the highest mountain in California and the continental U.S., Mount Whitney, was specifically targeted by the locals who resented him. Final nail in the coffin was hammered when, in 1992, radiocarbon dating indicated the Calaveras skull was probably around 1,000 years old. And of course, some hoaxes are just people trying to get a laugh. Take, for example, in 1917, when a New York newspaper called the Evening Mail published a story by the esteemed journalist H.L. Mencken titled A Neglected Anniversary, in which he wrote that Americans had failed to commemorate the recent 75th anniversary of the invention of the modern bathtub. He provided a variety of supposed facts about the tub, stating that it had been invented in Cincinnati and that Millard Fillmore was the first president to put one in the White House in 1851. Mencken even reported that taking baths once was outlawed in certain parts of the U.S. because doctors considered them hazardous to people's health. In reality, Mencken's history of the bathtub was a hoax, intended to highlight the American public's gullibility. However, in the years that followed, the article was reprinted in multiple newspapers and its fabricated facts showed up in reference books. Even after Mencken admitted in print in 1926 to the deception, a number of people continued to think his concocted history of the tub was completely true. Sorry about the tongue slips there. And talk about a washout. It's amazing what some people will believe. Now, if you were a museum owner and you had some artifacts that you thought were authentic and paid great money for, but later found out to be fake, wouldn't you be embarrassed? Well, that's exactly what happened in New York during the 1960s. You see, between 1915 and 1921, New York City's Metropolitan Museum of Art acquired 3 larger-than-life-size Etruscan terracotta warriors thought to have been created in the 5th century BC. The museum put the statues, allegedly retrieved from a recently discovered site in Italy, on display in 1933 when it opened a gallery featuring Etruscan art. Although the warriors' authenticity was challenged by some experts, a number of others deemed the figures real. In 1960, however, new methods of scientific testing demonstrated the warriors, for which the Met had paid quite a bit of money, were of modern origin. The following year, authorities learned that a group of Italian men had produced the forgeries decades earlier, based in part on photographs of tiny statues of Etruscan warriors exhibited at other museums, which just goes to show you that you should always be careful from whom you buy things. And of course, no hoax list would be complete without Bigfoot. Now, while documented encounters with a large hairy ape man go back for centuries, the legend of Bigfoot began when massive footprints started appearing along the Bruff Creek Timber Access Road in Northern California in the late summer of 1958. A bulldozer operator named Jerry Crew made a plaster cast of one of the footprints and showed it to reporters. On October 6th of that year, Humboldt Times reporter Andrew Gonzoli wrote an article that featured a photograph of the cast, and in the article, he coined the now famous term Bigfoot, and soon Bigfoot was being sighted all over the Pacific Northwest. A man named Ray Wallace, who was an inventive prankster, created the original tracks by stamping carved wooden feet into the ground. Wallace was having fun while also trying to discourage vandals from messing around with his logging equipment at night. Little did he know, however, that as he pressed the feet into the ground, he was creating a piece of Americana. And of course, some great hoaxes have came from the literary. It so happened in 1969 when a woman named Penelope Ash, a bored Long Island housewife, wrote the trashy book Naked made the bookstore rounds. But Ash wasn't what her book jacket claimed. The author was about as fictional as the novel she supposedly wrote, and both were the work of Mike McGrady. A Newsday columnist who was disgusted with the lurid state of the modern bestseller. And instead of complaining, he decided to expose the problem by writing a book of zero redeeming social value and even less literary merit. He enlisted the help of 24 of his Newsday colleagues, tasking each with a chapter, and instructed them that there should be, and I quote, an unremitting emphasis on sex. He also warned that true excellence in writing will be quickly blue-penciled into oblivion. And once McGrady had the smutty chapters in hand, which included the acrobatic trysts and toll booths, encounters with progressive rabies, and cameos by Shetland ponies, he painstakingly edited the prose to make it worse. And in 1969, an independent publisher released the first edition of Naked Came the Stranger, with the part of Penelope Ash played by McGrady's sister-in-law. And much to the dismay of McGrady, his ploy worked. The media was all too fascinated with the salacious daydreams of a demure housewife, quote-unquote, author. And though the New York Times wrote, in the category of erratic fantasy, this one rates about a C, the public didn't mind. By the time McGrady revealed his hoax a few months later, the novel had already sold 20,000 copies. Far from sinking the book's prospects, the press pushed sales even higher, and by the end of the year, there were more than 100,000 copies in print, and the novel had spent 13 weeks on the Times bestseller list. By 2012, the book had sold nearly 400,000 copies, mostly to readers who were in on the joke. But in 1990, McGrady told Newsday he couldn't stop thinking about those first sales, saying, "What has always worried me, the 20,000 people who bought it before the hoax was exposed." However, I hate to think that there's just some bored suburban wife out there who read it just to read it. With that, I will leave you. And what have we learned today? Well, we've learned, for one thing, that a sucker definitely is born every minute. And contrary to popular belief, it was not P.T. Barnum who said that. It was, in fact, George Hull, the mind behind the Cardiff Giant. And it doesn't take much to get people to believe something. I mean, I've heard it said before that if one man says the sky is green, it probably have some people begin to believe him if he said it multiple times. And it just shows you can never be too sure about something. So always be sure to take things when you hear them with a grain of salt, especially today. You can never be too sure if somebody is actually saying the truth. After all, that's how rumors get started. So goodbye and God bless.